Hey everyone, Nils here from Dinghy. This week we've been hard at work at our own website and we worked in a couple nifty interaction tweaks and animations into this new release. And I thought by now we actually have a handful of good examples to explain the practical use of recent additions to CSS and techniques that were just before very hard to do on the web, but by now are actually super easy. And I see a lot of videos where that are like theoretical about those features. And I thought I'd show you how we use them in production in a real world website. And so we're going to talk about layouting stuff in a circle. Then we have container queries. I think that's an exciting technology that we had for a while now, that we've been asking for since forever, and that I want to show you how we use it practically on our website today. Then we have also something that's a relatively recent addition to CSS, and I think is very exciting, and that is CSS only scroll-driven animations. So you know how these websites have parallax animations and all these things. All that is possible now without any JavaScript at all. The performance is really good, and thus it's really easy to enhance your user's experience when using your website. Then also, almost even newer, but available now in Chrome, Firefox, and Safari, so all the major browsers, is the View Transitions API. That means animating between one state of a page and another, even across navigating pages. So this was one of the most complicated things before we had this brand new technique in the browser. Now it's actually like a ridiculously little amount of code that you need to make something very impressive. And I'm also going to show you how we use that in production on our website today. And then another thing that is not as revolutionary maybe, but is the fact that we have Clip-Path in CSS. That means we can do visually interesting things to only show parts of an element. So let's start with the ring animation. We actually had this on our website for quite some time now, but I realized that we never really talked about it, and so I want to show you. I'm talking about this element right here. So as you can see, we have a bunch of images that are loaded from our CMS Sanity. We just load them in and we lay them out on this beautifully slow moving circle. And there's a couple of things to notice here. So first of all, it's a circle. Circles are something that were always hard to do on the web. Like the web just tends to be rectangular, and putting stuff in circles, that was just never really possible. But now in CSS, we have functions for sine and cosine, and that without wanting to go into too much math, but whoever remembers math from going to school, sine and cosine are the way to deal with circular stuff in math. And this is exactly what we're using here. Second thing to notice, it's not a perfect circle. The images, it seems to be like a little bit like an egg almost. And I also want to show you how we achieved that. And then the last thing, as you notice, the circle turns, but the images actually seem to not rotate. So how on earth did we do that? And let's look into the code super quickly. As I said, I'm going to do a little bit more of a deep dive in another video, but let's look at it today. So, here's the code for that component. And I'm going to move it over here so we also have the animation as a reference to see what I'm talking about. So first of all, this website is built using SvelteKit. This is not SvelteKit specific at all, not even Svelte or any front-end framework really. Just if you wonder about the API of my component here, that's Svelte. But you can absolutely do this in React or vanilla JavaScript or whatever you like. So let's look at the markup real quick. We have a regular list of images over here. So we have a UL, and then we're just looping over the images, as many as we have. And then we apply a couple Tailwind classes. So we use Tailwind. You don't have to use Tailwind, of course. Like, we have a relatively custom Tailwind setup, but we still use utility classes. Just want to call out that it's not necessary at all. Then we have our image, which is this sanity image component. Obviously, this is not needed for the animation at all. It's just how we load our images. And that's it. We literally just have a UL and nothing else here. And then we have this amount of styling right here that I figured would be super tedious to put into Tailwind. So this is just how we're using custom CSS on this component. All right, so the first thing, how on earth do we lay out these images on a circle? Okay, so to take this apart real quick, I'm going to disable the rotating animation for now. That is just this one here. That is for the big UL. And now you can already guess on how we're going to solve the mystery of the counter rotating images. But I'm also going to disable that animation for a second. So now everything's standing still, and we can inspect this a little bit better in our dev tools. So let's look at how this is set up right here. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller just so we can see it better. So here's our UL, and now we have the individual items right here. So let's look at one of the items here. So as we can see, they are absolutely positioned with the top and left, and then like the probably relatively well-known translate to self-center hack. So just subtract 50% and 50% of the X and Y of the own component. So it's just centered around the midpoint. Okay, and then for the top and left positioning, let's look at this mumbo jumbo here in the code editor, because I think it's going to be a little bit better to understand. So this is how this all works. Okay, so we're not going to get into the math like for real. I just want to let you know that we have a custom property set up here that's called distance. And distance is what we set over here as a custom property inside of the loop. And so I'm doing this only here because I want to use JavaScript to give me like a random value here that makes this egg shape appear. But we're going to get into that in a second. Let me just set this to like something static, like 50% or something. So you can see this is still looking the same. Now it's actually a perfect circle. If I take this in a little bit by 30%, you can see the images all move closer to the center of the ring. So let me get this in to 10%. So now you can see they all stack on top of each other. So how this layout works is that we position all of them absolutely. Let me get this back out a little bit. So we position all of them absolutely. And if we remove these values and also the translation value, then we can see they're all just stacked on top of each other perfectly. And so what we do now is using the sine and cosine function, and we have another custom property that tells us the index of this element, which we're setting here. That is literally just the counter of the index of the item in the loop. So it's just a number that's being assigned. And then we're doing like a smart calculation here where we sort of divide the index. We take into account the index of this element and divide it by the total number of elements that we have in the loop. And then using cosine and sine for top and left values, this is how these elements get pulled out into like a star shape. This is how this works. Again, we're going to go into this in more detail in another video. So now let's get back this random value over here. Now that we saw how to put these in a perfect circle, right? So just one more time, I'm going to set this to static 40%. So now they're all laid out in a perfect circle, but I don't want 40% distance from the center for all of them. I want a random value. So this is where I'm marrying JavaScript and CSS custom properties just in an inline style right here. And I'm using the math random function to get a random value. So, and we can see that if we look at the different LIs here in the browser console, then each of them has like a value around 50%, but plus minus a little bit. So between 45 and 55. And this is how all of this is being laid out. So the values are a little bit more, it looks a little bit more organic, right? So, and now let's re-enable one of the animations. So one part that makes this work is that we're rotating the entire UL, which is everything including the individual items, right? And so now this whole thing just turns, which has the annoying side effect that also the images sort of, go on top of their, spin around in a way that we don't want. So if I just take this down to like 30 seconds or something, we can see the animation going faster. And at some point it just looks ridiculous. To make this look nice, the idea of this animation is actually super simple. And I was super surprised that this works the way that it does, is that we just have another rotation animation on the individual items that we just we literally have the same key frames here, like from 0 to 1 turn, so 360 degrees. We use the same keyframe animation, we just let it run in the reverse right here. So as soon as if we enable this and then reload the page, we can see now the entire UL is still turning, but at the same rate, the individual items are turning back. So it appears as if they were standing still. Yeah, cool. So this is this animation, this little rotation thing. Now I want to show you something that we have right here. So it's a component that we use multiple times on the website, and it's the preview item, the preview component to preview a blog post. So there's a little bit something to unpack here. So the world has been very flat in the last 10 years, right? We all remember when iOS went from skeuomorphic to totally flat. And to make a long story short, we're feeling a little nostalgic, and generally I have the feeling that people are longing for more substance again. And so we thought, how can we make the preview of a blog post a little bit more interesting than just the standard cover image and headline with the date to it? And so we thought, let's make this look like a magazine, right? And so we came up with this component where this is the title of our blog, Beyond the Interface. We have a little date here. We have one of our categories up in this bar. Then we have the cover image that's always 16:9, and we have the headline, right? And here, I'm showing you here because the component is so nice and big over here. We have this little, like this little line on top of the magazine that's just adding some visual depth in that way that it, it creates this illusion of having this fold on the side of a magazine. And so if we look at this on the blog where we have multiple of them, then we can see why we did this. So this is our insights page, our insights stream of everything that we do. And we have articles, newsletters, and podcasts. And so the idea here is that if you have everything at once, we wanted to make it quick and easy to visually discern what type of content you're looking at. And so we have the magazine covers, and we have a newsletter here that I wanted to talk about after the magazine. And then we have podcasts as well. So you have everything in this one stream. Now, the thing that I wanted to talk about for the magazines are container queries. And container queries have many, many different applications. But the point is that before we had container queries, the only way that we could adapt something dynamically was based on the viewport size. So we always had VW, for example, for viewport width. That's the CSS unit that is based on the horizontal width of the entire viewport. Now, sometimes it's interesting to know not what the viewport size is, but what the container size is that the element is displayed in. And so I'm going to give you a super practical example. When we look at our newsletter subscription page, if we look at this, this sign up box here also has container queries applied. And I think it's going to become very apparent. Currently, we are on a big screen. So this is like a very big screen, and we have the component on the left side and the newsletter on the right side, and in a 2-column layout, right? So if I now resize my browser, we can pay attention to this little visual here on the side. So we're going to run into multiple situations where the layout is going to shift. So now, at some point, the visual, see, jumps to the top of the sign-up box. Now, if we go even narrower on the layout, the box jumps to the top because now the layout actually didn't change because of the component itself, but because we removed the 2-column layout. Now, suddenly, the component has more horizontal space than in this layout where we're still on 2 columns, right? But the viewport is actually smaller. And this was an impossible situation before. You could not fix with just media queries or with just the viewport width, because you also have this additional complexity of the 2-column layout, and that this actually defines how much space a component has. And so the same is happening for our magazine cover here. So we'll see that it's smaller over here, and over here down in the footer, it's a lot bigger. But as you might notice, look at this headline and look at the title of the element. Like, notice how this takes exactly the same amount of space, and it's exactly on 3 lines as it is over here. Like, it almost looks like like it's an image and you shrunk it down, but it's not, I promise. Like, we can select all of this stuff and can just go in here and see that this is text, this is an H3, this is a link, this is all of that stuff. And so this is because, let's jump into the code. Here's our blog post teaser. All of this is possible because of this little class over here. This is where I'm telling the wrapping div of this whole thing to be an inline size container. So CQ means that we have container query units, okay? And then the I is that we're talking about the inline size. The inline size is basically the new fancy word for width. So this is a whole nother topic. You could probably even say CQW. I'm not sure if this works. But so I'm basically saying the text is supposed to be, if we want to, this is equivalent to %, like it's easier to think about it. We want the font size of the magazine title to be 6% of the entire container width. So if the container shrinks down, the font size shrinks down as well. Yeah. Also here, gonna do like a longer video about how this really works, what the nuances are of this component. I want to show you how this animation works, that it kind of jumps out on load, how they do that even with a little bit of a time delay, like all the magazine covers come out after each other. We're going to look into all of that, but now let's move on to the envelope. Now let's talk about the other skeuomorphic or slightly skeuomorphic component we have going on next to the magazine cover, and that is this newsletter preview. So let's zoom in a little bit so we can really see it. A couple of things going on here. So first of all, the whole component actually has a background, right? So there's this slight background over here that just uses the space in the grid to show the subscribe button, which is, of course, one of the most essential things for every newsletter, that people find where to subscribe to this. And it uses the space that the animation needs for the newsletter to shoot out of the envelope like this. So you can see, as long as I'm hovering, it fills the entire space that we have up here. Then the idea for this is that, well, skeuomorphism, fancy word, is about the design to remind you of a real world object, right? And now this is not really real world. It's just supposed to, it's actually like a mashup, right? Like it looks a little bit like an email. So this is what this header is supposed to do, that it says from and the email address and the date. And then you have the subject line, and then you would have like an image and then the actual text and so on. And now this is nothing that would actually come out of an envelope, of course. So skeuomorphism, let's say fusion. But generally, just to remind you of something that, well, works like a letter has worked for the longest time. We just add this in an envelope, right? And so the background here, like it kind of merges over to the backside of the envelope, and then we have the front cut out. And the interaction then to use the space most effectively is that the email, the newsletter, moves out of the envelope, and at the same time, the envelope down, like the triangle, just opens a little bit more so you can see a little bit more of the text. And so because this is supposed to animate, right? Like there would be a couple different ways that we could approach this, like the triangular shape of the envelope flap in the background. That could totally be an SVG, of course. Like that could also just be like any other way in CSS to make a triangle with the border trick or something. But for the front, since we want this movement going on here and this shadow, like also that, I guess there's an argument to be made that it would be possible with SVG. Like you can just sort of, shrink down the entire image element. Like if I imagine that the front with this triangular cutout is like one SVG image, then you could move it down a little bit and maybe scale it vertically, and then it would also give the same impression. But we don't have to do this because we have Clip-Path. So let's look at the code. Here we are in our newsletter preview component. I'm just going to close the script part up here because we don't need that. So what we have is we have the container. That is this entire thing. Then we have like the subscribe button up here. That is just a regular link. Then we have article, which is the newsletter itself. And this has like the header thing with the email address and the subject line. Then we have the image and we have the text below. Now we have like two empty div elements for the envelope front and the front shadow. Okay, let's look into it. So what we're doing with the envelope is that we're creating a pseudo element. So we don't need too many extra empty divs. This is what we're doing here. So hold on. I'm just gonna move this over here and this over here a little bit so we can see what we're doing. So here you can see that I have Clip-Path applied with the value of polygon, and polygon just defines 6 points in this case. So if we disable this, you can see that this is the flap in the background. So maybe actually let's go to the front so we can see it a little bit better. I'm just going to comment out the Clip-Path, and now you can see what it does, right? So the way Clip-Path works is that we have this entire white element going around here. It's just like a regular rectangle, and Clip-Path now lets you, well, as the name would suggest, clip away from the shape. And what we're clipping away is basically a triangle. And we're doing that by saying our first point is 0, 0. So this is the top left corner. Then the next point is at 50% of the x axis, so up till here, and then 60% down. This is this point. Then we say 100% of the x and 0% of the y, so we're here again, and then we just go around with regular points. This part here, the 50-60, is really the juicy part, and now on hover, we're changing exactly that part. So if we look at the hover for the envelope front, then this is up to 50 and 90. And this is exactly how this animation works, that we're sort of just moving the top 3 points down so we can see more of the letter. And yeah, and this is mostly how this interaction works. Moving on to the next topic. Since we're here, like one crucial interaction of this insights page and the idea of seeing everything at the same time is that I want these elements to be discernible, but I also want to make it possible that you can just see the blog articles, right? Or just the newsletters or just the podcasts, like all of that should work. And the way that this interaction is working, that I'm showing you right now, like that they kind of jump over into their new position. If you go through between the all and the newsletters, for example, the way that this works is the magic of view transitions. So like if you look at the address bar up here, when we switch over to articles, then actually the URL changes. So, and if we do that with newsletters, then we can see that it also is actually a new page. And even like if we take that URL, just open a new tab and hit enter, then we can see that this is actually a new page, right? Like this is pre-filtered to newsletters and it's now a page that just shows you newsletters. And the same applies, of course, when I change this over to blog. And then we're on only all of the blog articles. And what view transitions makes possible now is that you basically tell it, look, each item here has a unique name. That's the key for all of this to work. Like each item here needs like an ID, like an absolutely unique ID. Can't appear twice, then the animation breaks immediately because the browser doesn't know which element you're talking about. And when you switch the page now over to articles, then it knows that this element has been in the layout over here, right? So it moves over here and it can see, because of the ID, that the element exists in the old and the new page, and then figures out between, like it does a comparison between the two layouts of the pages and sees this element that I know because I have this ID exists in both pages, and on the one page it's here and on the new page it's there. So I'm gonna move it over here with just a slight moving animation. And the way that it does that is that the browser basically takes two screenshots. So it screenshots the old page and the new page, and actually it's a little bit more complicated, of course, like it sort of screenshots every element on its own, then moves them over and removes the screenshot and just shows you the regular page. And so this is how that works. And I just wanted to show you in code, like how easy this actually is. So you don't think that this is super complicated to do or anything. So if we look at, this is the entire insights page. And here, this is the loop where we render all of the items. So every li in this loop is one of the items that we're showing in the grid. And here I'm using view transition name and, well, I don't know, like a whole mumbo jumbo of JavaScript code, just because we have different types of elements here. But don't worry about that. Like the important part is that if we look here, like if we look in the browser console, we inspect one of them, then we can see that this here, zoom in to make this so we can actually see. Here, the view transition name is something inside block personas that go from, is something super specific that just applies to this thing. And this is the key that drives this entire animation. So we have that going on here. And now here's our tab component that is this here, that actually drives the switching between the pages. And what we do is here, this is again like a Svelte kit specific thing, but this will exist in any framework that you use, is that we say on navigate. So whenever a navigation occurs, right, then we want to start a new view transition, right? And we want this to resolve before the navigation completes. This is basically what we're saying. And this is all we're saying. And that's the amazing part. Like we're literally saying, look, you're on a view that has a bunch of items that have a view transition name, and they're going to exist after the navigation. So do it. It's a magic do it. Like do your thing, move this over here. And that's it. Like if we look down here, there's no specific CSS styling or anything. And it really feels magical to use view transitions. I can just urge you to give it a try, because the first time you see this work, it's just really cool. I mean, how awesome is this? Like you navigate from one page to the other and stuff just shifts around. Like whoop, whoop, whoop. So cool. All right. And the last API that I want to talk to you about today. So we already had sine and cosine, we had container queries, we had scroll-driven animations, we had view transitions and clip-path. And now the final thing that I really enjoy as a web developer is the Popover API. Popover and anchor positioning. Let me show you what I mean. Up here, we have this little element going on. We also, for smaller screens, if we look at smaller screens, we have this menu going on, right? These menus are inherently annoying for web developers to make. Traditionally, because like you have to make this element first of all, but then, you know, this is a button. People, when you click this and you click outside, the menu should disappear. This should also work with assistive technologies, so this should be accessible. Like there's like a million details that I actually don't want to get into fully now. But so when we look at this in the browser here, then we can see that this has an attribute of Popover auto. Hold on, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more. Popover auto role dialog. And so another thing is that this has this little indication here that says top layer. This means this is all baked into the browser technology that basically does all of the accessibility work for you. Like you can probably still do something that's not really accessible using that technology, but by default, whenever you use a popover, this has all of the accessibility features baked in. And so top layer means it goes above everything else on the page. You don't have to manage any Z indexes or anything like that. Like the fact that I click out here and it just closes, or it closes when I press my escape key and stuff like that, right? All of this, I didn't have to do that. We had to do that before, like with weird key bindings and stuff like that, but we don't have to do it anymore because the browser does this for us now. So let's also look at the button that is located inside of the header. So, and this is the cool part where anchor positioning comes in that we're going to talk about in a second. Let's stay on Popover for now. So we have a button here that is totally in a different hierarchy of the HTML in the page, right? So we have the header, then it has div, and that has a button. And outside of the header element, we actually have the thing that shows when you trigger the button. I didn't even have to write JavaScript to tell this button to open this menu. Like they're not even close to each other, and still this works. And the way that this works is that this has an ID, right? And this button literally has just the attribute. It's so magic, I have to laugh. This just has an attribute that says Popover target and the ID name. That's it. That's what makes this menu appear. When you click this button, then that's it. It just shows it. I can add an animation for the element to appear. When you hit the button, that just happens as it would usually, but you don't have to wire it up with JavaScript. It doesn't have to be co-located in code or anything. Like you can have this element with the ID as long as just once with this ID on the page. You can have it anywhere. Like it doesn't even matter, and it will still work, which is just super awesome on its own. And now for the positioning, I can't even decide what's my favorite part about this. But for the positioning, like since these two elements are not even like in the same hierarchy in the HTML, that this element is actually positioned to the button element. Like this could also be relatively or absolutely positioned to the page now because, well, in this case, it does work, but I'm going to show you another example of anchor positioning in a second, where we see that this would not be the case, that you can just say top and right of the page. But so let's just stick here with anchor positioning for a second. When we look at the CSS for the menu, we can see that this has a top and a right of anchor top and anchor right instead of a pixel value. And this is in fact the magical part. So on top of this, like now this would beg the question, what anchor? Like what's the anchor? Like what are we anchoring to, right? And this is exactly what the position anchor style here does. So we give it a name of main nav trigger. This is doink what this has. So this has an anchor name, like we gave this button a CSS style anchor name and just gave it a name, main nav trigger. You can call this whoop-de-whoop banana face. Doesn't matter. You can give it whatever name you want. Also here, important, it has to be one-to-one. So that's important. But this has an anchor name, and this element has the position anchor. And we just use the name of the thing that we wanted to anchor to, like as we were throwing out an anchor. And then those two have a relation with each other. And now we can mess with that, sort of. So in this case, like if I don't define the top, for example, or the right, then this will go wherever. But I'm saying I want the top and the right of this element that I'm talking about, right here, to be the top and the right of the anchoring element. So if I change this over to bottom, for example, then we can see this, the top edge, now aligns with the bottom of the anchor element. And you can even use, like, it doesn't only have to be keywords here, like you can do calculations and you can use viewport dynamic values. You can do anything in the realm of these two elements being connected to each other. Like they know now where they are in relation to each other, and you can play with all of that. So as I said, I'm going to show you another example. So on the blog, we now have these little year numbers to indicate where a blog post starts in the new year, so to say. Like here's 2024, for example. And these things have like a little hidden Easter egg. So if we look at those in the browser console here, then we can also see that this has a popover target of year popover 2024. In this case, this is directly next to it. If we click it, it just gives us this little thing, which is technically exactly the same as the menu. So this thing here just has a little text that says, we published 121 blog pieces in 2024. And the button, again, has an anchor name, year 2024 in this case. And this has, as in the other example, a position anchor of that name. So we know that they are in relation to each other. And here we have the top and the left of the popover element to be the bottom center of the trigger. And then we're just setting it off by 10 pixels. So if like this is... if I set this to 0, then they touch, basically. But I just wanted this to be 10. And here we're using a little trick to horizontally center this below the anchor. Yeah. And this, my friends, is 6 new modern web technologies, web APIs that you can use today in production that I think make your life as a web developer or like a design engineer, whatever we call ourselves these days, a lot easier. So circular shapes, sine and cosine, container queries, view transitions, scroll animations, Clip-Path, and anchor positioning, and the Popover API. I can only urge you to play with these APIs. It's really a lot of fun and it makes stuff so much easier. All right, see you in the next one. Let me know if you have specific questions on any of these where you want more or less detail, but I'm going to make like a short video for each of the topics that I'm talked about with a little more detail and show a little bit more code. All right, see you then.